Why is fat loss hard? What really happens behind the scenes? You'd have seen a lot of people who lose weight only to regain much rapidly. Why does it happen? Arguably, fat loss is quite hard. We're going to look at why, right? So, I'm going to spend a little bit of time on the following topics: fat cells, specifically the formation, its life cycle, and how it functions or what it does, connection to the brain, neuroscience angle. We're going to talk a little bit about the fat loss biology and hormones and neuroscience. And more importantly, what does it take and probably how long it takes to lose fat, considering that it is very stubborn. And a few more things I'll speak from a male perspective, while most of the other stuff that I discuss is common and applies to women too. For example, let's say while women tend to store more of subcutaneous fat, the fat under the skin, men tend to are biologically prone to visceral fat around the organs, right? Now, what happens is while visceral fat is easier to burn, it also triggers a sharper panic response. Similarly, we'll talk a little bit about alpha 2 receptors and testosterone, which is more male specific. But largely, rest of what I speak is also generally applies to all humans. So I've written a lot of notes as I'm going to be turning my eyes away from the screen once in a while because a lot of these terms are really technical that I can't remember everything. So get used to that. Okay, cool. As someone who's been on the fitness path for a while, close to 3 years, I've seen a fair share of ups and downs in terms of fat loss, right? So part of why I'm doing this is also because I was very curious as to how it happened so that I know what I need to be doing. And I was very fascinated by the new learnings and findings I'm continually having. And some of what I'm going to talk about today were also new to me when I came across it the first time. Of course, I took a lot of help from AI tools to take a lot of notes. Okay, cool. Let's start with some simple things. The neuroscience angle, something called as leptin resistance loop. You have to understand that fat cells also release a hormone called leptin, which tells your hypothalamus, that is the brain, that you are full. You would have heard about two hormones, leptin and ghrelin. One hormone, leptin, tells the brain, or specifically the hypothalamus, that kind of has a map of all the metrics of your body, that I'm full, I don't need to eat food. That's your satiety factor. And there's another hormone called ghrelin, which tells the brain that I'm hungry, feed me or make him eat, right? That's the difference. Now, in men with high body fat, so we're going to look at why it's hard, right? In men with high body fat, the brain stops hearing the leptin signal. This is called as leptin resistance. Now, it's obviously easy to guess the result. Even if you have plenty of storage, let's say a lot of fat, the brain actually thinks that you're starving. So naturally, what does it do? It wants you to keep you alive. That's its primary responsibility. So what does it do? It lowers your metabolic rate and ramps up your cravings to save you from the famine that it has started imagining. So you must be thinking, why does the brain starve? I won't go too much into the detail, but it would suffice to tell you that while leptin is actually released, it doesn't reach the brain, right? It's like trying to tune into a radio station while you're driving through a tunnel. The signal gets jammed by interference. So the brain thinks, oh, I don't hear leptin, I must be starving. Okay, cool. That's how the brain lies to you. The other angle that I want to speak about, which is specific to men, is testosterone and cortisol. You have to understand that the relationship between fat and testosterone is very close and it's a vicious cycle. Now, fat tissue also contains an enzyme called aromatase, which converts testosterone to estrogen. So naturally, the more fat you have, the lesser your testosterone is going to be, and more your estrogen, the female hormone that you will have in your body. Now, what happens as a result? What's the downside? Less testosterone makes it significantly harder to maintain your muscle mass. And muscle is the primary engine that burns calories at rest. We'll go into these parts when we talk about remedy. But you have to understand that it's a vicious cycle. More fat, low testosterone, more estrogen, and then less muscle mass. Then the cycle continues. Then you become more fat, lower testosterone. It's going to be increasing fat and lower testosterone as a story. Okay, so we spoke about a couple of reasons why fat loss is pretty hard. We spoke about testosterone in men. We spoke about general leptin resistance that can happen for most people. Now let's also look at fat cells. What are fat cells? And what's their life cycle like? We've kind of established that weight loss is pretty hard. In general, the fat loss is pretty hard, right? I'm going to make the distinction very clear. So let's look at the secret life of something called as adipocyte or fat cell. A lot of us think that fat cells are just passive storage bags, but you have to understand they're actually a dynamic endocrine organ that are very good at growing really fast and very stubborn about living or dying. So let's understand. Let's for example, take a few fat tissues or fat cells, right? There are two ways they grow. One is hypertrophy, that is growing in size. When you consume more energy than you burn, existing fat cells stretch to accommodate the extra lipids. A single fat cell can expand 2 to 3 times its original diameter. So think of it like a normal balloon, which is not blown it or not stretched. But when it needs to store more energy, right, or lipids, it will expand 2 to 3 times its size. Or you can think of it like a raisin, which is blown versus shrunk, or a balloon, which is shrunk versus blown. Now, what happens if the balloon is, let's say, stretched to its limits? Welcome to hyperplasia. That is growing in number. So we spoke about growing in size. It reached its max size. It can't store anymore. So what does it do? Okay, let's grow in number. Smart, right? Once an existing fat cell reaches its critical volume, it cannot stretch any further. The balloon will burst, right? Or in this case, it doesn't burst. It doesn't want to. It sends out a signal to recruit pre-adipocytes to transform into brand new fat cells. While you have to understand this catch, listen very carefully. While you can easily shrink a fat cell that is in size, the balloon can actually shrink back. It is impossible to kill a fat cell once it has been created. Essentially, you can empty the balloon, you can empty the bladder, but the rubber stays in your body. This is one of the most interesting things that you should remember. So once you create you can always create a new fat cell, but you can never kill it, right? This you have to remember. We'll go a little deeper into that. Now, we've established that your body and your brain doesn't like losing fat cells because evolutionary, it's your survival and insurance policy against famine and any threat. But research also says that almost every year, 10% of your fat cells die. That is normal, just like other cells die and some cells are getting recreated, fat cells also die. But they are almost immediately replaced by the new ones, which means if you have X number of fat cells and 10% of them die, it gets recreated. The total number of fat cells in an adult remains remarkably stable throughout the life. Now to the next point, apoptosis resistance. What is it? Fat cells are incredibly resilient. Unlike skin cells that shed constantly, fat cells are programmed to resist apoptosis. You might be asking, why is it that fat cells can't die? That's the answer here. That's probably due to the reason of evolution, etc. The other, deflated cell problem. When you lose weight, the fat cells empties, but the physical structure, including, let's say, the mitochondria and the nucleus, everything probably remains. These empty cells secrete lower levels of leptin, that is your fullness hormone, and higher levels of ghrelin, the hunger hormone, essentially continuously screaming at your brain to refill them. So imagine you worked really hard to shrink your fat cells. Finally, the fat cell which contained a lot of lipids, you worked pretty hard, you dieted, you exercised, you did a bunch of things, and then you reduce it in size. Forget shrinking, just reduce it in size. and then it's screaming and say, fill me again, get me back to the original site. That signal is going to hypothalamus. Imagine the signal it will send when it shrinks even further. So it's continuously screaming and saying, feed me, which is why you will find people regaining their weight really fast because they cannot fight the nature of biology. It is very hard, right? It's not easy. So let's talk about a little bit about the difference between men and women here in terms of alpha 2 receptors that I spoke about. Not all fat cells are created equal. They have different receptors that respond to adrenaline, the hormone that triggers fat burning. There are two types, alpha 2 receptors, beta 2 receptors. What is alpha 2 receptors? These act like a brake on fat burning. Beta 2 receptors, these act like accelerator for fat burning. Men typically have higher concentration of alpha 2 receptors in the lower belly and love handle area. I wish I can stand up and show. I have a little bit here. Yeah. This is why a man might see his face and arms get lean pretty quick while his midsection stays exactly the same. The cells in the belly are chemically programmed to ignore the burn fat signal. Cool. Now, having told all of this, it just looks like a lost cause, right? Nothing really works. We've spoken about testosterone, we've spoken about loss of muscle, increasing fat, leptin and ghrelin, brain lying to you, hypothalamus getting confused and wanting to regain the old weight or the set point that it had. What do you do then? Is it impossible to lose fat and maintain it? Or are there ways to start making some change? Or is it a permanent physiological shift that we want to attain? Right? What you have to understand here is you're not just changing your weight, you're managing a living organ that is actively always fighting to return to its previous state. So it's much harder than what you think. We spoke a lot about fat cells and what they do when it is shrunk or what they do when they're full and then how they grow, right? And it continuously grows throughout your lifetime in terms of new cells when you eat more, very simple. But I didn't tell you how it formed because I was very curious when I was chatting with the AI tool to make these notes. I had to ask a lot of questions to understand, okay, it seems to be a one-way street. Fine, it keeps growing big. And then once it's big, it creates another one, another one. We keep growing millions and millions of fat cells. How does it form? At what time frame does it form? That's very important, right? So it so happens that by the time you reach 20, the total number of fat cells is largely set for life. I'll read about it. A landmark study published in Nature found that whether you're lean or obese, the number of fat cells in your body stays remarkably stable throughout your adulthood. Even if you lose a massive amount of weight, the number of cells doesn't decrease. The size of each cell just shrinks. We spoke about the one in, one out policy. Your body maintains this count through a tight replacement cycle every year. 8 to 10% of your fat cells die, but the body immediately replaces them to make sure the total count is the same. Now, I'll also speak about the ghost cell problem. Little bit I'll touch on it. I did mention about it. Same. So even if the cell reduces in size, I told you that the cellular membrane and the nucleus are still there. So it's almost like the grape becoming a raisin. And these shrunk cells are metabolically even more stressed and they keep screaming at your brain. And I told you what the brain does. It makes your metabolism pretty slow, right? Non-exercise activity thermogenesis, that is NEAT, reduces. It makes you move less, fidget less so as to save energy, and you start plateauing, right? You can't reduce the fat any further. Another aspect I wanted to know is something called as the inflammation or the overflow. Now, I'll just speak about it in brief and then we'll go into how we overcome this large battle. The previously shrunken fat cells, and if you overeat suddenly, which can happen to a lot of people, the fat doesn't go back into the cells cleanly. It can spill over into the blood, leading to high triglycerides. There you know. And fat deposits in the liver and heart. Next point is about, this is called as lipotoxicity, and he also speaks about fibrosis. In some cases of chronic obesity, the tissue around the fat cells becomes scarred, called fibrosis. This makes the fat cells even harder to shrink, so it can't even shrink because they are encased in a rigid protein matrix. It's almost like the fat cell is surrounded by some concrete, so it can't even shrink any further, so you're pretty much stuck. Okay, cool. We spoke about almost every other aspect, and I said we'll spoke about how to overcome it and possible methods that you can do to start making some changes to reduce fat and thereby your weight. If they don't die, how do we win? That's a question all of us have, and I also had the same question. So let's talk about the set point. You can't kill them, we established that, but we can keep them quiet. It's almost like, I can't do much. I can't really kill you, but I can tie your mouth. I can stop making you scream, right? If you don't scream, the brain doesn't make me eat more. But how do I make you not talk or not scream? Then that becomes your next important question. Think logically, right? It was screaming when it shrunk, but how do you make it not talk or not scream so that the brain, hypothalamus, doesn't send a signal to make you crave and eat more or move less? Research suggests that if you maintain, listen to this very carefully, this is important. Research suggests that if you maintain a lower weight from your original weight, let's say you're on a fat loss journey, you are at, let's say, 75 kilos. If you maintain lower weight, let's say 74, for a significant amount of time, often 12 to 24 months, the hormonal screaming starts to quiet down. Your body eventually accepts a new set point, which means at 75, your hypothalamus has been programmed to remember your weight at 75, which means the maximum you've gone, your brain remembers that. If you've been 85, it remembers that, which is why it's easy to go back to 85. And it's happy to take you to 90 also, but it will struggle to bring you down to 75 and 74. So let's say you drop down from 75 to, let's say, near 70. That becomes a new set point, but after a very long time of anywhere from 12 to 24 months. So when you see your online transitions on, let's say, social media, don't get fooled. Those things may happen, but it's not even recommended. Now that I've spoken about your leptins and ghrelins and hormones, your adrenaline and testosterone, estrogen, we've pretty much covered everything, right? You see how everyone plays a part. So these hormones will severely get affected. So it's not even recommended to lose more than 10% of your body weight pretty quickly. You have to do that slowly over a period of time. So think of it like a step. You're here, you drop, and then come to another step. You maintain it for a while. I'll talk about it a little more. Then again, you drop your weight, you maintain it for a while. Now this, you might be asking, why should it not be like this? I've tried the journey, by the way, right? Why should it not be like this? Why should it be a step down, like a step down transformer, right? If you maintain at a level, your brain accepts that as a new set point and starts to forget the old set point to a larger degree, right? So that's why you're telling your brain, hey, I'm not dying. This new weight seems to be very comfortable. Now reprogram and make sure this is the number you remember so that I can maintain this and go further from here. That's the beauty of you lying to the brain. Cool. Why? Okay, now coming to something, right? We spoke about how to lose weight in a step down way. And we also spoke about some disadvantages that men have. But what advantages do men have, right? You have a secret weapon called testosterone again, right? Now, muscle. I'm going to talk about this. I've spoken previously about why it's very important for men and women to do strength training, but I'll again touch upon this topic. One biological advantage we have over women, of course, is we can put muscle much faster due to testosterone and other factors. Muscle is the only tissue that can effectively sink the glucose and fatty acids that these empty cells are begging for, which means the extra energy that you take, instead of going to the fat cell, the traffic gets diverted. Okay, let's say this mic is my fat cell, food is going, muscle comes, picks up. Let it go here, let it go here. Don't take it to the fat cell. So if a man increases his muscle mass, he increases his basal metabolic rate or BMR. This allows him to eat enough to satisfy the brain's hunger without refilling your ghost fat cells. Pretty clear, right? So you need to build more muscle. Secondly, I also want to speak about how the fat gets burnt. In general, a lot of misconceptions are there that fat is burnt through sweat or through urine or multiple other ways. In general, in science, they were very clearly established. Of course, your triglycerides are broken into carbon dioxide and water, and 84% of the fat you lose leaves through your body, through your lungs and your breath. Your fat cells are like bad eggs. They might be out of your life, but they're still blowing up your phone, asking to come back, right? Now, you gently cannot hyperventilate to lose weight. That just makes you dizzy. You have to create a metabolic demand. And what is the metabolic demand? Exercise that forces the body to break the carbon bonds in your fat cells to release the energy. So you have to remember that 84% of your fat leaves through your body, through your breath. That is all you have to remember, lungs and breath. That is what it is. So what do? We've spoken about muscle. We've spoken about the metabolic stress that is, or the trigger that is required for burning the fat cell also, right? Which is exercise slash, let's say, HIIT. And then you want to do strength training to make sure you build enough muscle to divert all the traffic there so that your fat cells become senescent or old enough and stop screaming at a particular point in time. Now you might be thinking, what is this 12 to 24 month rule? It just looks too long. That's just biology, right? So let's go a little deeper into that. I spoke about it in terms of the levels, the step, but I will speak a little bit more because I've written it down. I want to ensure that I don't miss out some interesting stuff that you will carry home after this talk ends. Biology doesn't change overnight. Research suggests that it takes 1 to 2 years of consistent maintenance for your brain to recalibrate to a lower weight. I spoke about it in a different language. The first 6 months, the screaming is loudest. Hunger hormones, ghrelin, are high, and fullness hormones, leptin, are low. This is the relapse danger zone, which is why people who lose weight are able to relapse fast and gain weight really quick. 12 months, what happens at 12 months plus? The body begins to accept the lower energy availability. The ghost cells become senescent slash dormant. They're still there, but they stop signaling as aggressively as they did before. At the 2 year mark, so we finished 6 months, 12 months plus. Now let's go to the 2 year mark. Your metabolic rate stabilizes. Your brain begins to defend the new lower weight as the normal weight. Now, from here, you can again start losing weight. Does it mean that you lose weight and then you wait for 12 months to 24 months to lose weight again? Not necessarily. But just understand that you have to, if you're on a fat loss journey in general, give yourself enough time and don't do the downward slope. Do a little bit of downside. Let's say in a month, typically it's good to lose about 1.5 to 2 kilos. It's very safe for everybody to lose that kind of a weight. Nothing really happens. So you lose it for 2 months, maybe 2 to 4 kilos or 4 to 5 kilos. Maintain it for some time, maybe a month, month and a half or two, and then again start dropping. Right? That is what I'm trying to tell you. Okay, we spoke about month, we spoke about everything, set points. Okay, cool. Yeah, we spoke about resistance training, which is mandatory. Otherwise, you really can't lose weight much. Yeah, I also want to tell you that don't try only crash dieting or only dieting to lose fat. It doesn't work. I already explained. You need a trigger, for example, for the metabolism to kick in and start breaking the fat cells. And exercise is one of those triggers. Similarly, there's a lot of evidence and research which show that pure dieting doesn't really help. And most likely the biology or the underlying physiology will not help you, and in fact it will make you eat more and then gain that weight really back. In fact, you'll bounce back twice as fast. I think pretty much, I think we have covered everything, guys. I think this is a, I hope you found this session really useful. I want to speak about it last week, but I was a little lazy. That's not good, right? That's why I sat today and I finished it off. So think of this: if you're a man or a woman, if you're looking to lose fat, all you have to do is make sure you eat a reasonable amount of calories. You don't need to starve. You eat the right amount of food, your proteins, your carbs, your fats, eat the right portion. Make sure you do strength training. When you strength training, you have to lift weights at least 2 to 3 times a week so that you can maintain your muscle. Yeah, walk quite a bit, eat well, sleep pretty well. At the same time, ensure your fat cells are not dying. They're in fact listening to you as we speak, and then it It's trying to bounce back to life. So to keep them dormant and senescent and make them stop screaming, you need to watch out and then maintain your weight for a long time, right? What you could actually think of is also this, right? As you can add new fat cells throughout your life, it might be wise to not overeat to add new fat cells. So also if you're a parent and if your kid is a teen, 13 to 17, 18, etc., this is the right time to tell him or her to watch out for the right amount of body structure that they want. Because after 20, you know what the science and biology does to you. I hope this session was quite useful to you as much as it was for me, even making those notes. I wrote a lot more, but it was just too much to cover in a podcast. But if you like it, please share. And yeah, a few words of encouragement in some form will help me do more of it. Thank you and cheers.